I am in Southgate, so good morning. I'm Liliana Nunez. I work in the Office of Community Air Protection at the California Air Resources Board. I'm here with my colleague Terry Allen, and we'll be facilitating this breakout room. First, we'll introduce our community partners that are presenting today on environmental racism in South LA and how the community is mobilizing to address environmental injustices. And then we'll open it up for discussion. So it's really great to see this many people that I still see are trickling in. And with that said, we do have a lot of people here and we want to keep the chat open. So, and I appreciate the good mornings. But at some point, once the presenters start the presentation, we'd ask you to keep your comments in the chat reserved until we're instructed to do so by our presenters. And so also in the discussion section, we'll use the raise hand feature, and it's located in the reactions button. Or if you have an older version of Zoom, it's likely in the participants button. And if you're on the telephone, please enter *9. So I'll get on with the introductions. I'm introducing Paula Torrado Plazas. She's a project manager for in the air and toxics programs at the Physicians for Social Responsibility Los Angeles. She has experience in air pollution monitoring and analysis, community science, and environmental policy advocacy. In her role, Paula leads the PSR-LA's Community Air Protection Grant from the California Air Resources Board to address air pollution burden in South Los Angeles. And she also co-authored PSR-LA's 2019 South LA Air Quality Assessment Report. She also coordinates the Californians for Healthy and Green Economy Coalition and supports policy efforts that address the impacts of legacy toxic chemicals in frontline communities. She's passionate about addressing the pollution burden and bringing relief to people of color communities who are overexposed to toxics and air pollution. Paula graduated from the University of Houston with an Earth and Atmospheric Science degree, and she was recently selected as a Bloomberg American Health Initiative Fellow to pursue her Master's of Public Health at Johns Hopkins University Bloomberg School of Public Health. And we're grateful to have Paula presenting her amazing work today. And I'll kick it over to Terry.
Hi, everyone. My name is Terry. I work for the California Air Resources Board, and I'm going to introduce Jaquelyn Badejo. I work closely with both Jaquelyn and Paula as part of the AB 617 program that the state of California has. And we're currently in process of developing a community emission reduction program. Jaquelyn Badejo is a longtime social and environmental activist who served as a local politician in Los Angeles, California for 7 years and is very committed to organizational and environmental issues on a global scale. She has an expertise in community organizing and advocacy, nonprofit industry, economic and human capital development, and program and policy impact strategizing, and has provided a unique scope of transformative leadership and innovative practices and technologies to help improve the overall quality of life, utilizing her experience in Watts as a model of change. Her slogan, "Let's make the world great together," is Ms. Badejo's bottom line, which encompasses principles of integrity, transparency, and accountability across the board. She has a Bachelor of Arts in Cinema and Television Arts from California State University, Northridge, a Master's in Public Administration with an emphasis in nonprofits from California State University of Northridge, and a doctoral of education and organizational leadership with an emphasis in Christian ministries students from GCU. So the next slide we're going to get into here before we hand it over to our community advocates here is just, sorry, there we go, a map of the South LA area. And as you can see, heavily redlined. This is the map that this whole webinar is based around, this pollution and prejudice project. And most of this area actually is under AB 617 as a designated community right now, if not South LA, some of the neighboring communities that are also under the AB 617 program as well. And so we wanted to just highlight some of the language here. As you can see, it can be a little bit jarring, obviously, and obviously extremely antiquated and outdated as well. And so what's important to understand is that this redlining that took place in the South LA community still has indicators today in terms of the quality of the environment and the health of the residents. So what you're seeing here on this slide is just some of the highest percentiles for various indicators of pollution and health in the South LA area based on the map I just showed you. You can see it's the 89th percentile for diesel particulate matter, 79th percentile for drinking water, 83rd percentile for hazardous cleanup sites, 82nd percentile for asthma emergency room visits, 87th percentile for cardiovascular disease, and the 96th percentile for poverty. So we're going to move on. I'm going to hand it off to Paula so she can go through her presentation.
Thank you so much, Terry. So good morning, everyone, and thank you for that background on redlining, and I'll talk about it a little bit about in regards to our project. But as Liliana mentioned, my name is Paula Torrado, and I am the Air and Toxics Policy Analyst at Physicians for Social Responsibility, Los Angeles. And a quick background about myself, I was born in Colombia, and I came to the United States 7 years ago to explore my passion for the environment and for environmental and social justice. And that journey took me to work directly with frontline communities in Houston and all the way to South Los Angeles, where I understand this journey taught me how both communities in different ways are plagued by environmental injustices. And that has definitely shaped my mission to become a strong environmental justice advocate. And I'm passionate about ensuring that we address pollution in a way that focuses on bringing relief to communities who are overexposed and underprotected to toxic exposures where they live, work, and learn and play. So today I will talk about our community air protection grant that was granted through the AB 617 program that passed in 2017, our project to understand the sources and health impacts of local air pollution in South Los Angeles. Next slide, please. So a little bit about Physicians for Social Responsibility Los Angeles, which is the leading organization for the SCLA-PUSH project initiative, which is an organization that advocates for policies and practices that improve public health, eliminate environmental nuclear threats, and address health inequalities. PSR-LA has over a decade of experience working in South Los Angeles communities on toxics, air pollution and climate change, land use and community development, and oil and gas extraction. So PSR-LA brings the strength and credibility of health professionals to local organizing efforts and regulatory action and advocacy. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the project motivation, how the SCLA-PUSH initiative came to being. And it's really rooted in the history and the rich history of South Los Angeles, which is the traditional land of the Tongva and Gabrielino peoples, the original caretakers of the Tongva, which is nowadays the LA Basin. South Los Angeles is a historic Black and Brown community that has a rich history shaped by different shifts in labor markets, housing policy, and that have led to different economic displacements and gentrifications. Social forces such as discriminatory practices as redlining and environmental racism have shaped the broader narrative of South LA, including the rich history of South Los Angeles to address the environmental injustices on a daily basis, including the co-location of industrial facilities, continued oil extraction, poor air quality, contaminated land, and poor urban infrastructure with different mobilization actions throughout history. Next slide, please. So a little bit of timeline and background, again, for grounding us in our community and history. So one of the housing practices in the early 20th century, as Terry was mentioning, the discriminatory real estate practices such as redlining cemented a pattern of exclusionary development that allowed for white home ownership in suburban neighborhoods of Los Angeles while concentrating industrial activity in non-white and immigrant neighborhoods, including in and around South Los Angeles. And so during this type of rapid growth, several national firms such as Goodyear, Firestone, Phelps Dodge, and US Steel settled in and around Los Angeles. And we see how that impacted air quality, as in 1943, the LA Times reported that a pall of smoke descended on downtown LA, cutting visibility and striking in the midst of a heat wave, which was considered the gas attack and was barely nearly unbearable. And this timeline sort of also describes the strong history of organizing for environmental justice, which includes community organizing, influencing environmental regulations, identifying alternative solutions, and building grassroots powers. Next slide, please. So one of those examples of those moments in history in South LA is in 1985 or 1987, a community group called the Concerned Citizens of South Central LA, a group of mostly Black women, successfully blocked the construction of a waste-to-energy incinerator, Lancer, in the heart of their neighborhood. This was a major milestone in environmental justice organizing in South LA. Jumping all the way to 2013, organizations, along with PSR-LA, created the Standing Together Against Neighborhood Oil Drilling, the Stand LA Coalition, that is fighting to phase out fossil fuel dependency in the city of Los Angeles. So this is a quick snap of the history and background and the importance of grounding in the community-driven research in the history in order to develop solutions. Next slide, please. So this is, again, a brief history of how we got where we are, and all the way to 2006, when AB 32, the Global Warming Act, was passed in California, cap and trade, and all of these legislations that has led us to where we are at this point in history in South LA, where we're granted a community air protection grant to build capacity in South LA around air quality. So I just wanted to quickly show this history, this timeline, that just to show how long it's taken and how potentially how long it will continue to take to actually get to tangible solutions and emissions reductions to the frontline communities that are overexposed to toxic air contaminants on a daily basis. Next slide, please. So continuing on the background of South LA, so these communities are facing multiple cumulative stressors and hazardous exposures that, when combined with existing vulnerability, lead to different adverse health consequences. So environmental factors that contribute to poor health conditions include the presence of 4 freeways in South LA, clusters of industrial sources of air pollution, legacy of contaminants, oil and gas extraction, etc. And the fact for South LA is that current air monitoring provides a very incomplete picture of the state of air quality, in part because there are no regulatory grade air monitors located in South LA. And so there's a huge data gap in what the state of air quality looks like in the community, leading to lack of enforcement and lack of accountability. Next slide, please. So air pollution is intrinsically linked to land use patterns. Again, linked to the legacy of redlining and environmental racism that has implications all the way until today. Still, we live it today. And so the designation of land often dictates the type of industry located there. Historically, city planning has not prioritized the separation of hazardous land uses from sensitive populations. And as such, the result is clustered of incompatible land uses disproportionately concentrated in South Los Angeles. According to the Health Atlas, in 2013, more than 21,000 South LA residents lived within 500 feet of a major truck route. and other unwanted land uses such as manufacturing and oil refining. And we know that research has linked industrial pollution exposure to health impacts, developing chronic diseases such as asthma, cancers, and even heightened mortality to COVID-19. Next slide, please. So this is a map of the Virus Screen, which is an environmental justice screening tool used in California to sort of understand cumulative burden in different communities. And South LA overwhelmingly scores on the top 5 to 10% of the most vulnerable communities across California, and vulnerability to socioeconomic stressors such as underemployment, lack of affordable housing, unsafe working houses, racism, social exclusion, and pollution burden can make residents less able to cope with health problems and susceptible to disease, mortality, and morbidity. And so the reality for South LA is that although residents and community advocates have fought and won many victories in the battle to clean up the air in recent decades, the fact that air pollution still threatens local communities, it shows how it's clear that any solutions proposed must be centered on impacted and frontline communities' voices if we expect to see real changes on the ground. So this is the ambitious mission in charge of the SCLA-PUSH project. Next slide, please. Which is a collaborative effort led by PSR-LA and community-based organizations, including SCOPE, Strategic Concepts in Organizing and Policy Education, Esperanza Community Housing, Watts Clean Air and Energy Task Force, and other academic partners such as the University of Southern California and the Occidental College. So with the SCLA-PUSH project, we have implemented a collaborative and creative process to building communities' capacity to understand and assess the state of air quality and its impacts on community health and well-being. Our work is rooted in the community residents' experience and wisdom because they are the experts in understanding the landscape and the needs of the landscape and their neighborhoods. And so even though AB 617 has provided an impetus to address localized air pollution in disproportionately impacted communities, it comes with many challenges as well, given that it's a program that it's highly competitive and it places communities against each other to fight for resources to be at the table of the decision making for air quality improvement plans and policy advocacy. But again, through the AB 617, we were granted 2 community air grants, and we're working now with Watts Clean Air Task Force on our second air grant. And some of our project goals, next slide, please, are to build capacity with community members and advocates to understand the fundamentals of air pollution, mobilize community members to address systemic failures in air pollution data collection, ensure that South LA communities get the fair share of resources needed to improve air quality, and finally, to being intentional about community-centered processes that are that can be part of the just transition towards cleaner and healthier communities. Next slide, please. So the approach that the SCLA-PUSH collective has taken is to build capacity with community members through different activities and popular education tools. And the process of community science and centering on community residents' local expertise is crucial to addressing the data gap in government air quality monitoring, especially given the lack of regulatory air monitoring in South LA. And also to ensure that solutions and policy advocacy truly reflect the community's needs. Participatory, community-driven research and air monitoring in neighborhoods not only helps characterize local air quality, but can also help increase environmental health literacy, raise awareness, inform policymakers, and contribute to decisions to improve public health. And these are some of the activities that we have implemented in South LA: air quality academies, mapping workshops, and community walks to observe the neighborhood's needs and challenges. Next slide, please. So our Air Quality Academy was our innovative training model to build capacity, and it was a 2-day trainings. And by the end of this 2-day training, residents would learn the fundamentals of air quality, engage in mapping sensitive land uses, design the community air monitoring network to guide data collection, master the use of monitoring equipment, including P-track monitors and air beams, which are low-cost sensors for particulate matter measurements, and strengthen their ability to engage in the air quality regulatory landscape. So these are some of the pictures of our Air Quality Academy graduates, and ultimately, next slide, please. Ultimately, all of these activities are meant to equip community residents with the resources to be air quality ambassadors, to use their power and their voices to uplift their community voices and be able to influence the regulatory decision-making process, and to be community researchers, radical scientists, to be able to drive what gets prioritized, what the solutions are, and how the solutions are put into action. Next slide, please. One of the key activities that we did in the project is the ground truthing, which is a community-led method of engaging residents in collecting and verifying data based on local understanding of the conditions by walking the blocks and conducting observations such as the noise pollution, odors, and visible pollution in the area. And one of the things that we found with the ground truthing process is that a lot of the identified facilities of concern or industrial facilities in South LA may be underestimated because these facilities are at times misidentified, misclassified, or simply missing in official databases. So this is an opportunity to improve some systems that regulate some of these facilities of concern, in addition to having the tools to set air quality priorities and build grassroots power of owning South LA data for policy advocacy. Next slide, please. So I wanted to quickly highlight our community stories, our community leaderships that have been a key factor in ensuring that South LA was selected for an AB 617 Community Air Improvement Plan. And I wanted to show a quick video of Iritha Wormsley, one of our fierce leaders. So Terry, I don't know if you could share the video now.
I'm so sorry. As your facilitator, I have to do a time check. And I
Okay,
know that
thanks.
the videos, but I'm gonna put them on.
You can put them, yeah.
The link
Just
on the chat.
okay. We can just share the link, the videos on the chat. Thank you so much. So yeah, please look at those stories as they are very powerful. But I'll go through this real quickly. So next slide, please. And next slide. Next slide. Yeah, thank you. So with our SCLA-PUSH project, we identified 280 facilities of concern in South LA, all the way from oil drilling sites, auto body shops, gas stations, and dry cleaners. And something that we learned with this project is that decentralized community air monitoring networks can offer timely information to supplement regulatory data and inform strategies to reduce emissions in those targeted sectors that can also address cumulative burden and incompatible land uses. Next slide, please. And between June 2019 and August 2020, our project team deployed purple air monitors, stationary air monitors, to measure particulate matter PM 2.5 data. And this is a graph of a monitor that was installed in one of the community-based organizations' office. And you can see how over the span of the year, we observed that PM 2.5 concentration is consistently above the national standard for PM 2.5 in the neighborhoods adjacent to that specific monitor. And that's a map over there of the different monitors that are close or nearby to South LA. Next slide, please. We also found with the collection of data that the average PM 2.5 concentrations among the 11 existing purple air monitors located in the community was 20 microns per cubic meter, which is again higher than the national standard for PM 2.5, which is 12. And we found that in general, winter months were the highest for PM 2.5 levels, and that 5 monitors consistently measure PM 2.5 levels above the national standard 40 to 50% of the time throughout the year. Next slide, please. So this is an example of measured ultrafine particulate counts, which was done through our ground truthing walks with the community residents. And as we pass an intersection in Watts, the neighborhood of Watts in South Los Angeles, a diesel truck passed by nearby and the concentration spiked to over 300,000. So over the course of an hour, we observed multiple spikes in ultrafine particulates on a residential street. So the data of our SCLA-PUSH project, community air monitoring walks, corroborates how community residents may experience harmful exposure to air pollution, even when air pollution daily averages are healthy. Next slide, please. So we also conducted a cumulative burden a study, and the top concerns for the community were visible fumes, bad odor, smells, being close to freeways, illegal dumping, and cracked sidewalks, which also create cumulative stressors for the community in addition to pollution burden. Next slide. So finally, taken as a whole, the preliminary assessment of the South LA project has told us that air pollution in South LA is a serious and complex matter, and that a lack of regulatory agencies oversight of facilities of concern and air monitoring in South LA both limits our understanding of the air pollution problem and reveals the need for more community empowerment in research and policy decision making. South LA communities continue to experience the health impacts of legacy air pollution, legacy redlining, and environmental racism. And that's why our SCLA-PUSH project is bringing together community residents, advocates, scientists to start paving a path towards healthier and thriving communities that are focused on solutions that are rooted in the environmental justice movement and a just transition. Next slide, please. So I think this is it for me. Thank you so much for your time. And if you have questions, please refer to the sclapush.org website. Thank you.
All right, so we're going to move along and hand it over to Jackie.
Yes, and what is the time check?
So we have 10 minutes before we have to go into the main room, but
Okay.
we'd also like to,
I'll make this
there are some
easy.
questions in the chat that are pretty interesting. So sorry, Jackie.
Okay. No, it's okay. I just wanted to make sure. So, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the South LA breakout room. I guess what I'll do is just pretty much go into redlining and the highlight of Watts in Northwest Compton. This area is located in both the county and the city territory. And so Watts, being a Watsonian born and raised, it has been a complicated situation. You know, oftentimes, you know, as Paola was mentioning, the various burdens outside of even the pollution is something that really can be at a community and, you know, take them away from various industries. I believe I did see a question in the chat that said, where did we expect them to build this? These industries and the freeways, most definitely not around communities that would suffer from them, which were racially driven. You know, when people migrated from down south, like my family did from Louisiana in the late 50s for my family, we were business owners. We still own the businesses today, but there's still what you couldn't even go across Central without getting lynched. We have to really be mindful about the racism and all the isms that existed to create this situation and how now these communities have been almost isolated and live in the highest polluted areas. But to get back into this, you know, this was the old blighted laborers district with serious subversive racial influences. So all the industries, a lot of people who were in the military moved here. You know, they were like military camps, the housing projects. We have to just be mindful of all the things that were happening globally, nationally, and then how it affected the local movement of everything. We could just really go to the next slide. Because what I just want to do is just send a message. I decided to do this presentation outside with my feet in the soil so I can be very grounded. And I just want everyone to know that we see these devastating percentiles of how pollution impacts it, which is tied into redlining and how these communities were developed. So diesel particulate matter 74%, the drinking water a 75 percentile, hazardous cleanup site 62, poverty 94, cardiovascular 87, and asthma and emergency room visits. I believe we all know that asthma is something that is not hereditary. Diabetes, all these things are not hereditary. It comes from the environment, which everyone dwells in. And what I would like to say to everyone is to just be mindful and creative. You know, we talked about infrastructure earlier. When we're in positions that control the infrastructure, even the planning committee for the city of Los Angeles, they've been doing various series that talks about, you know, redlining and how they know, you know, what they did. And the thing is, you know, as like I'll speak on behalf of the people, when we hear these things, even for instance, LAPD with Metro, oh, we know that we've been profiling you. Oh, but we're sorry. Let's all begin to think about what comes after the sorry. How do you, instead of saying it, how do we show it in the various positions that we hold? And how can we be creative and not oppressed from policy and procedure? This is what it's really about, because at the end of the day, I see in the chat, we said we know it exists, but as an individual and coming from the positions that we all sit in, what are we going to do about it? That is what I just would like to ask everyone to think about, so we can begin to coordinate and really bring forth environmental justice. I didn't want to, I know that time is going, but I would like to just really get into the questions. Like for me, it was very hard being a community leader. I served on the Watts Neighborhood Council for 7 years. But yeah, let's talk about the bandwidth. There's no bandwidth in a large part of South Los Angeles. So it's information that people do not have access to. So how can we make sure that we're representing the community to really identify how things can improve, because we know this detriment has happened. So I would like to really just get into the questions, because I feel that it's important for those to be addressed and answered, and for everyone to give their input, taking into consideration the time constraint.
All right, so I'm going to hand control over to Alfonso, and then if we could just get a link where people can go to the website in the chat to drop the or to respond to the questions.
So we'll give folks a second to access the poll. And you're also able to hold up your phone by opening up your camera to scan this QR code here. That'll direct you to the survey.
I wonder if in the interest of time, we can go to the most interactive question, which is the last one with the word cloud. Yeah. So, Jackie, did you want to, or Paula, did you want to introduce this, or I can just read it off? You know, I think here it is.
I'll go for it. So this question is important. How can we build a path to clean production and a just transition and healthier communities for all? We have so many legislations coming down, you know, the electrification of vehicles, just many different things. And how do we work together to really ensure that, one, the individual, the business, and the businesses and overall communities are able to have a just transition? And as I mentioned earlier, it's very hard sometimes for people to access data. You know, education, that's so important. Not only just the individual or a resident needs to be educated, but business owners and, you know, community infrastructures, you know, schools, the brick and mortars of the community. How do we come together to really plan this? You know, I'm very grateful for Physicians for Social Responsibility, because they are a community group and they reached out to us and they educated us. And that's why we are here. That's why together we are co-leads along with Scope, Carbon AQMD, to make sure that South LA was really represented. I mean, let's think about even what we're saying now, South LA. When I was growing up, coming up as a young person, it was called South Central Los Angeles. So think about, how does that tie into redlining? We have redistricting that happens every year. One year, me and my family, we got redistrict outside of Watts because we lived on the other side of Central. And we have to ask the questions, why was that? what was happening politically, and what are we going to do as individuals, voting parties, to influence the political climate to make sure that everyone is fairly represented so we can truly have a just transition. So whatever comes to your mind, we have various polluters. And what I've been asking lately is, are those polluters even educated and truly understand? How do we support them, which ultimately supports our communities where our families and loved ones dwell? We have to understand the importance of, the piping, what's above and below the ground. That's something that most people do not think of. We need to understand how we educate how to further connect water, air, and soil, because they're all connected. So what is our role going to be to minimize these health disparities, which many industries have convinced us that are hereditary? It's not hereditary, it's that their family, generations of their family have been dwelling on these lands, which have been improperly used, going against the safety of the community, all for the sake of the almighty dollar, which it has really no value, because I believe in currency. It's the currency with the most high, and then within the community, everyone feeding the soil. We've been far removed from the soil, and we have, come to think that these are the only options when it's not. We have to stop in our positions, allowing our creativity to be, stomped on and dissolved. We have creativity. We can really think of ways where we can really become sustainable communities, where we properly use this land that we were blessed with. It's a blessing. And so how do we show gratitude for the blessing?
Thank you, Jackie. So I see we're coming up on 11. Looking at the word cloud, seems some of the words that stick out are enforcement, collaboration, community involvement, community engagement, accountability. I think those are all important things to consider as we move forward. And I just urge everyone to think about, even with in your own organizations, how you can make sure those things, for those of you working in government, or even those of you working in the community, have businesses there, how you can ensure that all of these things work seamlessly to give us a better tomorrow. Jackie, I don't know if you wanted to touch on that and send us off.
Yes, what does a better tomorrow look like? How does that give honor and respect to the land and to the people? How do we enforce the things that should be regulated instead of enforcing the things that we've been taught to regulate and focus on? Even Mayor Garcetti admitted he serves 8 years and it's time to go, because everything is disjointed. Many federal, state government entities are disjointed. And in most cases, community input has become jargon. And so how do we stray away from this culture that has been created so that we may all live in peace and harmony? How do we create liberation from dissonance? Because even if you're not living in South LA, you're affected some way. Just even speaking with LAPD in a workshop I did with them, whatever is done in another state, it's going to affect them. And we are the leaders of this movement. Everyone looks to us. And so it's no easy task, but I just encourage you all to stay steadfast and always creative in thinking, how can we do our jobs better? And I thank you for your service. And thank you for joining today.
Yeah, I want to thank everyone too. The link to join the main room, Liliana just dropped that in the chat. If anybody has any questions or anything, I think you're able to stick around. But otherwise, again, thank you all.